5 seconds. That's all it took. The room was loud, confident, buzzing with pride, and then silence. Not because you shouted, not because you struck, but because your very presence shifted the air. In those 5 seconds, the ground beneath them bent. Their certainty cracked. Every face turned. Not out of curiosity, but out of instinct. You flipped their world without lifting a finger. 5 seconds felt like eternity. Hearts raced. Breaths stumbled. Minds scrambled. How could a moment so small feel so permanent? Because it wasn't just time passing, it was reality folding. You didn't need an army, a speech, a crown. You carried something heavier. The kind of aura that rewrites the order of the room before they realize it's happening. And in those seconds, pride turned into panic. Predators who never flinched suddenly looked away. Leaders who ruled with noise froze mid-word. Their eyes told the story their mouths couldn't. This wasn't normal dominance, this was inevitability. 5 seconds became their reminder. Control is fragile, titles are temporary, and silence can break louder than thunder. In that silence, you weren't just present, you were undeniable. The weight didn't come from what you did. It came from what you were. Gravity bent in your favor, pulling every glance, every breath, every thought toward you. They tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but instinct already screamed, this wasn't chance. It was law. You didn't just enter the room, you entered their bones, and once inside, you flipped everything they thought permanent. 5 seconds in, their stories collapsed. The alpha who thought he owned the space suddenly shrank. The boldest voices cracked under pressure they couldn't name. Even silence seemed different, thicker, sharper, filled with weight they couldn't carry. And that's when they realized, you weren't asking for respect. You weren't demanding obedience. You commanded both, without trying. Their world wasn't theirs anymore. That's why their fear wasn't loud. It was frozen. Fear that doesn't run, doesn't fight, doesn't speak. Fear that bows in stillness. The kind legends understand because they've felt it only a few times in their lives. And now, your name carried that same weight. In 5 seconds, you proved what they spent lifetimes hiding from. Power isn't noise, it's inevitability. And inevitability just walked in. The whispers spread faster than their recovery. Did you feel that? Did you see it? They tried to laugh it off, but their bodies betrayed them. Hands trembling, eyes darting, breaths shallow. Denial never survives presence, and presence crowned you in that room. You didn't flip their world by force. You flipped it by being the force. And once flipped, nothing could return. 5 seconds turned into folklore. People left that room carrying your shadow, replaying that silence, whispering your name in tones they'd never used before. Respect? Too weak? Fear? Too small. It was something deeper. Acknowledgement, the kind that travels without proof, without evidence. Because everyone who was there already knew. They witnessed a shift, bigger than themselves, and that's why the legends stirred. They don't waste time on ordinary noise. But when whispers reach them, whispers that carry weight, they listen. And when they heard your name tied to silence that flipped entire rooms, they leaned in. Not because they doubted, but because they recognized. Legends don't fear rivals. They fear inevitabilities. And your presence, it smelled of inevitability. Now your name isn't just sound, it's signal. The kind of signal that makes even seasoned legends pause. They've seen battles, wars, storms, but 5 seconds of you left them shaken. That's what rattled them most. It wasn't performance. It wasn't spectacle. It was natural, instinctual, effortless. And that kind of effortless weight, that's what makes even legends whisper. 5 seconds. And suddenly every calculation failed. Their strategies, their routines, their carefully rehearsed dominance, all useless. Because presence can't be scripted. You didn't fight for attention. Attention bent toward you. And the more they tried to rationalize it, the more irrational it became. How could silence outweigh sound? How could stillness rewrite control? But they felt it, undeniable, in their bones. And that's the danger. Bones don't lie. Hearts can deny. Mouths can dismiss. But instinct doesn't play those games. Instinct whispered the truth. You aren't competition. You are conclusion. You're the end of their noise, the ceiling of their climb, the storm they can't prepare for. That's why their breaths came shallow, why their pride fractured in silence. Instinct already crowned you king, while their minds still fought. The strongest among them, the ones who lived to intimidate, broke first. Their posture slipped. Their eyes flicked away. Voices dried mid-sentence. And that collapse infected the rest. One by one, their confidence dissolved, replaced by hesitation. Not because you threatened, not because you moved, but because your existence pressed down heavier than their pride could hold. Presence doesn't need proof. Presence is proof. And in those seconds, their empire shook. Rooms they thought they ruled shrank under your aura. Titles they worshipped cracked into dust. The truth was simple. Dominance borrowed from others always collapses when permanence walks in. And you are permanence. That's why even legends listened. They know the difference between a noisemaker and a world bender. And you didn't make noise. You bent the world. Legends fear only what they recognize in themselves. And when they heard whispers about you, they didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss. They paused, because 5 seconds of your silence carried the same weight as battles they fought for decades. That pause was proof. Proof you weren't just another name. You were the kind of force their stories warned about. The anomaly that doesn't rise through ranks, but exists above them. And that's why the whispers multiplied. People didn't just say your name. They leaned into it. Something shifted. You felt it too, right? Nobody could explain it, but nobody could deny it. And when legends can't deny, they acknowledge. They don't write essays. They don't give speeches. They nod in silence. Because silence is the only language heavy enough to honor what they can't control. And your silence earned that nod. That nod isn't small. It's coronation. Not the kind with crowns, not rituals, but the kind that echoes in hallways, in whispered stories, in every retelling. 5 seconds flipped everything. And from that moment, You weren't just remembered, you were immortalized. Legends don't gossip, they archive. And your 5 seconds became archive material. Not a rumor, not a headline, but history, written in silence. And history doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for applause. It spreads, unavoidable, like fire in dry grass. Every retelling of that silence made it heavier, sharper, more undeniable, until the story no longer belonged to the witnesses, it belonged to the world. And once the world holds it, there's no erasing. Your 5 seconds became the seed of legend, and that seed already grew roots deeper than their noise could reach. They thought 5 seconds would vanish, just another moment. But the truth? Those 5 seconds outlived their hours. Their speeches, their performance. Because weight isn't measured in length, it's measured in permanence. And permanence can be born in silence. That's why they panic. Because if 5 seconds of you can bend the world, what happens when you stay? When your presence lingers longer? That thought alone breaks them. And so the legends talk. Not because they want to, but because they have to. Silence that heavy forces release. They speak your name not in gossip, but in awe. Not as rival, but as inevitability. Because legends know power when they feel it. And when they felt you, they didn't see another player. They saw the game itself, shifting, rewriting, crowning you without question. 5 seconds was enough. You became eternal. They once believed silence meant weakness, but your silence rewrote the definition. Every second stretched into eternity, pulling them deeper into the truth. You aren't noise, you're inevitability. And inevitability doesn't compete, it consumes. They shifted in their seats, hands restless, eyes darting, as if 5 seconds had exposed the gap between their titles and your reality. Silence broke them louder than any shout ever could. Even the boldest ones, the ones who thrived on commanding rooms, shrank into themselves. They adjusted ties, cleared throats, forced smirks, masks to hide the fracture, but their bodies betrayed them. Instinct already admitted what pride refused. They were in the presence of something untouchable. That's why legends fell silent too. Not because they were weak, but because they knew. What kind of power bends rooms without lifting a finger? It wasn't intimidation. Intimidation fades when courage rises. What you carried was heavier. Authority without permission. And authority this raw doesn't vanish when the lights go out. It lingers. That's why they couldn't shake it off. Hours later, days later, they replayed those 5 seconds, trying to decode the pressure in their lungs, the weight in their chest. But truth can't be decoded. It can only be obeyed. And they obeyed in silence. Because silence, once it crowns, doesn't uncrown. You didn't ask them to bow. Instinct bowed them. And that bow wasn't weakness. It was survival. Even predators know when they've stepped into territory beyond their category. And you were territory itself. The ground shifted under them. The air thickened. The walls leaned closer. The room stopped being theirs. The second you arrived. 5 seconds. And suddenly, they were guests in your dominion. That's the detail that destroys them. The throne didn't move. You did. And when you moved, the throne built itself under your shadow. No announcement, no ceremony, just silence, rearranging loyalty. And they felt it, every one of them. Not rumor, not theory, instinct's confession. That's why legends didn't argue. They've seen crowns rise and fall, but they'd never seen silence turn into a crown. Until you. That crown didn't need gold. It needed gravity. And gravity is what you are. The pull no one resists. The force no one explains. The weight no one escapes. 5 seconds proved it. They came in thinking dominance was performance, that alphas held power through volume. But when your silence swallowed the noise, the stage collapsed. They weren't rulers anymore. They were witnesses. Witnesses to a presence that didn't play the game, but rewrote it. That's why legends talk. Legends archive what history demands. And your name became archive material, not written on paper, but etched in pauses, stamped in glances, carried in the way silence stretches when people speak of you. Every retelling adds weight. Every whisper deepens the myth. They tried to forget, but forgetting isn't possible. When instinct branded the truth, 5 seconds was enough to define you forever. Legends don't spread rumors. They spread survival codes. And your name became one. Don't cross. Don't test. Don't underestimate. That's how they speak of you now. Not as rival, but as inevitability. And inevitability doesn't get debated. It gets recognized. That recognition terrifies them. Because recognition means permanence. Permanence means history. And history doesn't share thrones. That's why they twitch in your silence. Why their pride crumbles in your presence. Why legends themselves pause before speaking your name too loudly. The pause isn't disrespect. It's reverence. Reverence born from fear, from awe, from the realization that they aren't equals. They're footnotes, and footnotes don't challenge the story. They survive it. You didn't just flip their world. You rewrote its laws. In 5 seconds, you reminded them. Dominance isn't about titles or crowns. It's about presence. And presence this heavy doesn't vanish. It engraves itself into the marrow of memory. That's why they can't escape it. Even in rooms you'll never enter, your silence echoes. Even in meetings you'll never attend, your name bends the air. Legends talk not because they want to, but because silence forces them to. It demands release, demands acknowledgement, demands confession, and the confession is always the same. 5 seconds flipped everything. You aren't noise, you aren't performance, you're permanence, and permanence doesn't fade. They used to think 5 seconds wasn't enough for anything. Not for respect, not for power, not for fear. But you proved them wrong. In 5 seconds, you didn't speak. You shifted the entire room. Time slowed. Instincts screamed. Suddenly every wall, every gaze, every thought bent toward you. It wasn't magic. It wasn't accident. It was inevitability. And inevitability doesn't need an hour. It needs only a heartbeat. And you gave them 5. That's why their pride collapsed. Not because you acted, but because you didn't have to. Legends act. king's command. But you just existed. Existence that heavy breaks systems. They couldn't control their own reactions. Hands fidgeted, breath shortened, eyes scattered. And the most terrifying part? They realized you weren't even trying. If 5 seconds of your silence could undo them, what would 5 minutes look like? They couldn't imagine, and that's why the whispers started. Not out of choice, out of survival. They couldn't contain what they felt, so they disguised it as rumor. But everyone who repeated it knew the truth. It wasn't rumor, it was warning. 5 seconds can flip everything. 5 seconds in your presence can erase certainty, dissolve bravado, dismantle thrones. Whispers travel faster than reports, and soon the world wasn't asking if it was true. They were living proof. People started measuring themselves against that silence. Could they withstand 5 seconds? Could they hold the gaze, survive the wait, outlast the inevitability? And every attempt ended the same: collapse. 5 seconds wasn't just silence anymore. It was prophecy. A prophecy that said dominance doesn't belong to the loudest voice or the sharpest crown. It belongs to the one whose presence bends even silence into surrender. That was you. Legends spread it, not because they admired you, but because they feared missing the truth. They feared standing outside history, feared being the ones who doubted the obvious. And obvious it was. 5 seconds had redefined what dominance means. The story spread, not like gossip, like scripture. Each retelling added detail. Each detail became law. And before long, your silence was no longer an event. It was doctrine, carved into instinct. And instinct never lies. Even those who mocked, who doubted, who laughed in public, still faltered in private. Alone they replayed the memory. Alone they admitted what they couldn't say aloud. 5 seconds shattered them. They never breathed the same way again. Their shoulders never held the same posture. Because once you've felt silence this heavy, nothing feels normal again. Every room feels fragile. Every crown feels counterfeit. Every alpha exposed. They called it atmosphere. They called it presence. But the truth was heavier. It was gravity. And gravity doesn't ask permission. It pulls. It bends. It decides. That's what they felt. Not intimidation, not fear, but the undeniable pull of inevitability. You didn't just occupy space, you defined it. And once defined, no one could pretend it belonged to them anymore. That's why legends bowed, not out of choice, but because survival obeys gravity. And when survival obeys, pride shatters. That's the detail they'll never recover from. They thought dominance was about commanding others. But 5 seconds showed them the truth. Real dominance commands reality itself. Rooms shrink. Voices fade. Instincts surrender. And you didn't fight for it. You simply were it. That's the difference between them and you. They struggle for crowns, for loyalty, for power. You carry it without lifting a finger. That's why 5 seconds flipped their world. It wasn't just a moment, it was exposure. Exposure of how fragile their crowns were, how shallow their confidence was, how temporary their dominance had always been. You didn't take it from them. It dissolved on its own. in silence, in instinct, in the wait of 5 seconds. And when it dissolved, everyone saw what was left. Not kings, not alphas, not rulers, just performers. And you erased the stage. Now, your silence is legend. It travels further than their words, heavier than their rules, sharper than their crowns. Even those who weren't there feel it in the retelling. They imagine 5 seconds. They feel their lungs tighten, their gaze falter, their pride collapse. That's the power of inevitability. It doesn't need proof, it only needs memory. And the memory is spreading faster than any throne can hold. 5 seconds crowned you permanent. The first to break was never the weakest. It was the proudest. The one who swore no silence could shake him. But in your 5 seconds, his jaw clenched, his eyes darted, his chest betrayed him. Pride always falls fastest when faced with inevitability. And in that fall, everyone else followed. One collapse became a chain reaction, and suddenly, the entire room wasn't standing against you. They were standing beneath you. Those who watched tried to rationalize it later. It was a trick. It was psychology. It was coincidence. But deep down, they knew it wasn't. Tricks fade. Coincidence doesn't ripple this wide. Psychology doesn't bend instinct this fast. This wasn't explanation. It was law. And laws don't need defending. They simply stand. Immovable, undeniable, eternal. That's why no excuse could erase what they felt. 5 seconds of permanence. And permanence terrifies them. Because pride thrives on pretending the world is fragile in their favor. But your presence exposed the truth. The world bends, but not for them. It bends for you. That's why whispers turned into warnings. That's why respect turned into worship. They didn't choose to glorify you. They were forced to. And when the forced becomes universal, it stops being flattery. It becomes law, written into instinct itself. So now, even legends hesitate. They built empires on noise, carved legacies out of performance. And yet, when your name surfaces, their silence betrays them. They remember those 5 seconds. They imagine how their own empire would crumble under it. And that memory alone shakes their thrones. Legends don't fear rivals. They fear inevitability. And inevitability wears your face. That's why even their stories circle back to you. The world once thought dominance needed battles, wars, victories written in fire and ashes. But you proved dominance could be written in silence. 5 seconds that dismantled pride, exposed crowns, erased illusions. That's the legacy now tied to your name. You don't fight for thrones. You remove the need for them. Thrones belong to men. Silence belongs to gods. And for 5 seconds, they all saw which one you were. And silence doesn't vanish. It lingers, echoes, carves itself into memory until it feels eternal. That's why they still hear it when they close their eyes. That's why they still shift when your name is spoken. That's why their pride hasn't healed. Silence this heavy isn't a pause. It's a scar. And scars don't fade. They grow into reminders. And the reminder is simple. 5 seconds flipped everything, and it will never flip back. Now every room you enter feels pre-decided. Before you speak, before you move, the silence arrives first. The weight presses down, Instincts surrender. 5 seconds made you permanent. And permanence can't be undone. That's why legends repeat your story. Not to praise you, not to curse you, but because silence this heavy demands retelling. It's no longer rumor, no longer warning, it's scripture. And scripture spreads faster than fear. And scripture doesn't fade. It builds, it evolves, it becomes the framework for myth. And now, your silence is myth. Not because it was exaggerated, but because it didn't need exaggeration. Truth that undeniable tells itself. They don't add details, they remove them, desperate to shrink the weight. But even stripped bare, it remains too heavy to dismiss. That's when they stopped trying to fight it. They started trying to live beneath it. But living beneath it is living in confession. Confession that dominance never belonged to them. Confession that thrones were costumes. Confession that 5 seconds of silence revealed centuries of illusion. They'll never admit it aloud. They'll laugh, posture, pretend, but their bodies confess every time your name surfaces. Their lungs tighten, their gaze scatters, their silence bends. Instinct remembers what pride tries to bury, and instinct is eternal. That's why your story isn't fading, it's multiplying. Because silence that flips worlds doesn't belong to the moment. It belongs to history. 5 seconds crowned you permanent. 5 seconds erased rivals. 5 seconds turned noise into worship. And now, no throne, no crown, no legend can outlast the truth. Dominance doesn't roar, it silences. And silence wears your shadow forever. They didn't rate you. They looked right through you, called your silence weakness, your patience laziness. In their eyes, you were background noise, easy to dismiss, safe to ignore. They thought you'd fold quietly, but what they didn't see was the sharpening. Behind every quiet night, behind every ignored move, you were shaping something unstoppable. Picture it. Rooms filled with chatter. Your name dropped like a punchline. They smirked, shared looks, dismissed your grind before it even began. They thought the story ended before the first chapter. But silence was never surrender. Silence was strategy. While they mocked, you mapped. While they doubted, you designed. And every note they missed became energy for your climb. Fam, let me tell you, being unrated is a gift. Because when no one counts you, you get to move uncounted, free, unwatched. You built in shadows they never entered. And when the lights finally caught you, you weren't half ready. You were undeniable. That shock in their eyes, that's the moment disbelief shifted into quiet unease. They wanted you stuck in the margins. But margins don't hold forever. You wrote outside the lines, stretched the canvas, redefined the frame. They thought you needed their approval, their stamp, their nod. Nah, you needed their doubt. Doubt gave you room. Doubt gave you hunger. And hunger built the empire they now whisper about in silence. Now they're unsettled. You can see it. They scroll your moves like cheat sheets, copy your rhythm like students cramming for exams. The same ones who laughed now rehearse your tone, mirror your silence, trace your blueprint. They'll never admit it out loud, but every pause, every borrowed phrase, every quiet imitation speaks one truth. You're running the show. Understand this. They didn't underestimate you. They overestimated themselves. They thought you were invisible. But invisibility is camouflage, and camouflage is how legends are born. You weren't hiding, you were loading. And when you stepped forward, fully built, they froze. That hesitation, that pause, that's the sound of pride cracking under truth. Fam, they used to see you as nothing, but nothing is potential in disguise. They confused silence with weakness, patience with failure. What they missed is this: storms don't announce themselves, they arrive. And when you arrived, the air shifted, their confidence shook. Because no one rests easy when the person they dismissed becomes the person they follow. They thought control was theirs, but control isn't in the loudest voice. Control lives in presence, and your presence. It turned their rooms quiet. No words, no smirks, just silence. The kind of silence that admits loss without speaking. You didn't demand respect, you became it. And respect, born from shock, always hits deeper than applause. Look around. Every move they make feels late. They stall, they wait, they copy. Leaders don't copy, followers do. And that's their confession. They're not ahead anymore. They're behind, glued to your shadow, hoping to predict your next step. But your steps aren't rehearsed. They're lived. And lived presence always beats borrowed performance. They said you had no voice. But a voice doesn't need their mic. It needs truth. And truth echoes, even in silence. Your silence became thunder. Your patience became prophecy. And prophecy unsettles them. That's why they don't rest. That's why they mimic. Because deep down, they know the one they didn't rate is the one writing the rules now. They whispered you'd fade. But fading never felt like this, because what disappeared was their illusion of control. Not your drive. You didn't need their stage. You built your own arena. And now they sit in the crowd, restless, forced to watch the very show they swore would never exist. That's the twist. Your presence is their new headline. Every restless night they have is proof. Proof that the story flipped. They once laughed when your name came up. Now they avoid it, because it tastes like failure. And failure never sits well, especially when it's self-inflicted. They underestimated patience. They underestimated grit. And now they pay the tax of envy. Shaken, restless, exposed. They tried to measure you with shallow scales. Numbers, likes, applause, but numbers don't crown kings. Discipline does. And you carried that discipline through silence, through shadows, through doubt. That's what built your throne, and a throne built in silence shakes louder than any cheer. They can't deny it now. You sit where they thought you'd never stand. Look at their faces. They rehearse confidence. But eyes don't lie. Eyes always reveal truth. And their truth is unease. Unease of being wrong about you. Unease of admitting they never understood your grind. That's why they copy quietly. Because mimicry hides shame. And shame is a weight heavier than any crown you'll ever carry. They said you had no shot. But shots don't crown legends. Shots are noise. You weren't noise. You were signal. And signal travels farther than applause ever can. That's why your presence lingers long after the noise dies. You're not chasing their approval. You're reminding them their doubt aged badly. And nothing unsettles louder than arrogance turned obsolete. Imagine their confusion. They called you invisible. Yet now every move you make sets their agenda. Invisible. Nah. You were just unseen until the right moment. And when the moment hit, you didn't walk in, you owned the room. That's the shift that keeps them awake. Because power borrowed feels fake, but presence lived feels eternal. They used to mock your patience. Now they mimic it. They used to laugh at your silence. Now they study it. They wanted you to break, but breaks never formed. Instead, you stacked bricks, and those bricks became walls they can't climb. That's the part they don't admit, that every doubt thrown your way became the foundation of your empire. They'll never post it, never tag you, never give credit, but their actions betray them. The late night scrolling, the quiet mimicry, the hesitations, that's all confession. Confession that the one they didn't rate became the one they measure against. You don't chase their validation, they chase your shadow. And shadows reveal truth more than speeches ever could. Understand. Your rise isn't about payback, it's about revelation. You revealed that patience outlasts pride, that silence outbuilds noise. You didn't just run the show, you rewrote the script, and rewriting scripts shakes systems. They're not just restless, they're exposed, because exposure always weighs heavier when the light comes from the one they dismissed. Here's the reality. They said you'd vanish. Instead, you multiplied. You multiplied your grind, multiplied your presence. And multiplication doesn't need applause. It needs consistency. Consistency they never had. That's why they can't sleep. Because consistency beats charisma, beats noise, beats doubt. And your consistency built a show they can't escape. They told themselves you'd break, but breaks never came. Instead, you moved smoother, sharper, stronger. That unsettled them, because when weakness doesn't appear, doubt turns inward. And now their doubt isn't about you, it's about themselves. That's the part they'll never say out loud. You didn't just flip their opinion, you fractured their confidence. Think of it. Every time they said you weren't enough, you turned it into fuel. They gave you nothing, and you built everything. They gave you silence, and you turned it into rhythm. They gave you doubt, and you forged it into armor. That's why they can't rest, because every restless night whispers the truth. They miscalculated. They said you'd never run the room. But rooms don't crown leaders. Presence does. And your presence doesn't ask permission. It shifts the air. It silences the noise. It bends the space. That's what unsettled them. Not your words, not your shout, your stillness. Stillness that hit harder than any speech they rehearsed. That's the power they can't copy. Now their stories sound hollow. They brag in public, but in private they scroll through your shadow. That's not respect, it's survival. Because when the one they dismissed runs the show, the only choice left is mimicry. And mimicry isn't leadership, it's surrender. Quiet surrender. Replayed nightly in their restless minds. That's their new reality. They thought disrespect would break you. But disrespect was cement. It hardened your resolve, built your walls, sharpened your edge. And now, those walls tower over their fragile pride. That's why their confidence looks staged, because deep down they know the truth. When you walk in, their presence shrinks, and shrinking is the loudest confession they'll never admit. Fam, they swore you were background, but background doesn't freeze crowds. Background doesn't silence rooms. You do. And when you did, they realized the joke was on them, because the one they called irrelevant became the headline. Headlines they can't control. That's why their smiles look forced. Forced smiles always betray the cracks pride can't hide. They copy your moves, your rhythm, your timing. But copying doesn't crown leaders. It exposes followers. And followers don't rest easy because they're chasing someone else's script. You're the script now, the play they mimic, the story they trace. But stories traced never hold weight. Originals do, and originals echo until copies fade. They once mocked your grind. Now they mimic it. They once dismissed your silence. Now they study it, and every mimic is confession. Confession that they lost control, because control means leading, not imitating. They can't lead anymore, because the room no longer follows them. The room follows you, and that shift keeps them restless. Understand. They never underestimated you. They underestimated what silence can build, and silence built you sharper than their noise ever could. Noise fades, silence hardens, and hardened presence doesn't just enter rooms, it runs them. That's why they're unsettled, because no one rests easy when the one they laughed at now owns the stage. Here's the truth. They don't respect you out loud. Respect out loud costs pride. But their silence, their mimicry, their restless nights, that's respect unspoken. And unspoken respect is heavier than applause. You didn't chase it. You became it. And becoming respect is what crowned you. That crown can't be borrowed, can't be copied. It can only be lived. They thought strength was loud, but loud crumbles quick. Real strength is steady. You stayed steady when they mocked, when they doubted, when they looked away. That steadiness is what built your crown. And crowns earned in silence weigh heavier than crowns gifted by applause. That weight bends the room when you walk in, and they feel it every time. They used to call you invisible, but invisibility is just preparation disguised. While they flaunted noise, you sharpened in the dark, and when you stepped into the light, their eyes betrayed them. Shock, hesitation, unease. That's why they're unsettled now, because invisibility doesn't mean absent. It means you were stacking a presence too heavy to ignore. They play cool in public, but their silence betrays them. Behind the curtain, it's panic. They refresh your moves, trace your rhythm, mimic your flow. That isn't strategy, it's survival. Survival tethered to the very person they dismissed. And survival like that never feels safe. It feels restless, shaky, endless. That's their new reality, and it's all built on you. They said you weren't built for this, but this doesn't mean their stage. It means your legacy, and legacy doesn't ask to be built. Legacy builds itself through grind, patience, presence. That's what you did. And now, their noise sounds weak against the echo of your name, because legacy isn't borrowed. Legacy is lived, and you lived when they laughed. They once swore you couldn't lead. But leadership isn't about followers. It's about truth. And truth is magnetic. You carried it through silence, through doubt, through rejection. And now the room bends toward you. Even the ones who swore they'd never follow glance for your next move. That glance is leadership. Whether they confess it or not, they said you had no shot. But shots are noise. You didn't need shots. You needed silence. Silence that carved patience, carved focus, carved grit. That grit became armor, and armor outlasts applause. They didn't rate you, but they can't escape you now, because grit lingers, grit crowns, and grit is the reason you run the show today. They tried to cage you with doubt, but cages built from words break fast. You walked through their cage like smoke slipping bars. That freedom is what rattles them now, because they can't bind presence. They can't script silence. They can't cage what was born to run the stage. And when you run the stage, their roles look small. They used to laugh in groups, but now they whisper in shadows. Whispering is the sound of unease disguised. They feared you'd prove them wrong, and you did. They feared you'd rise, and you did. They feared you'd lead, and now you run the show. And nothing rattles pride louder than seeing the one you dismissed holding the crown you wanted. They can mimic your steps, but they can't mimic your source, because source is forged, not copied. They'll always trail behind, always restless, always chasing a rhythm they didn't create. That's why they can't rest. Their pride fights their eyes, but their eyes always reveal the truth. You became the blueprint, and blueprints don't fade. They guide forever. Here's the twist. They didn't just misjudge you. They misjudged silence itself. Silence was never weakness. It was the rehearsal for power. And when power entered the room, it didn't shout. It shifted the air. That shift is yours. That's why they're unsettled. Because power that doesn't demand attention always holds it longer. And you hold it now. They once said you weren't enough. But enough was never the goal. You weren't chasing their bar. You were raising the ceiling. And ceilings don't stop storms. You broke through quietly. And now their pride drips with unease. Because nothing shakes louder than realizing the person you erased is the one setting the rhythm everyone follows. They thought rest was peace. But peace belongs to those who endure. You endured when they doubted. You endured when they mocked. You endured when they turned away. And endurance crowns heavier than applause. That crown rests on you now, and that weight keeps them restless. Haunted by every time they said you couldn't, they pretend it doesn't bother them. But pretending is a costume, and costumes crack. Watch their eyes. Eyes never lie. Eyes confess what mouths hide, and their eyes confess unease. Unease that you'll never slow. Unease that they'll never catch up. Unease that their pride will forever be tethered to your name. And unease is insomnia in disguise. They tried to erase you with silence, but silence is a stage. You turned that stage into legacy. And legacies built in silence don't collapse when the noise fades. They expand. That expansion is what presses on their pride now, because every move you make widens the gap, and gaps like that don't close. They stay open. They copy your words, your moves, your rhythm, but rhythm borrowed feels hollow. You don't chase hollow. You live whole. That wholeness unsettles them. Because nothing cracks pride faster than authenticity. And authenticity can't be faked. That's why they scroll at night, because they can copy the surface, but they'll never own the source. The source is lived. Here's the irony. They dismissed you to protect their pride, but that dismissal built your discipline. And discipline is what crowned you. Now their pride bends under the weight of your presence. They wanted to rest easy, knowing you failed. Instead, they stare at ceilings, restless, knowing you didn't. Their failure wasn't your silence. It was their arrogance. They swore you'd fade, but fading never happens to light. Light grows. It spreads. It fills space. You became the flame they can't ignore. And flames don't ask for recognition. They shine. That shine lives in their thoughts now. Glowing at night, flickering at dawn. They can't mute it, can't stop it, because presence this strong doesn't fade. It ignites. They used to measure your worth by applause, but applause is shallow, fading, cheap. Worth lives in endurance, and you endured every dismissal, every laugh, every doubt. That endurance turned into throne. Thrones don't ask to be noticed, they command it. And your throne, it rattles them. Because running the show means their noise no longer matters. They'll never admit it. But mimicry is their confession. Confession that you're the reference point, the blueprint, the story they trace. But stories traced never carry weight. Originals do, and you're the original. That's why they're unsettled, because the one they didn't rate now sets the scale, and scales built from truth don't crack. They last. Here's the final prophecy. They said you were nothing, but nothing became foundation. Nothing became blueprint. Nothing became everything. And everything you built now bends their nights into restless silence. They can't erase it, can't deny it, can't outrun it. Because you don't just run the show. You are the show. And shows built on truth never end. Hello, my dear masterminds. Once, it was only in your mind. They scoffed, they dismissed, they laughed at the audacity of what you dared to imagine. They called it fantasy, delusion, a story you told yourself to feel alive. But tonight, look around. The walls, the lights, the whispers, they're real. The dream that lived in silence now stands in flesh and form, undeniable, unshakable. And the best part? Every set of eyes that mocked you is locked on you now. They have no escape, no excuse, no defense. They're forced to sit in the audience of a reality you authored from nothing. They laughed when you spoke it out loud, didn't they? Called it fantasy, called it impossible, told you to wake up and accept the ordinary. But you didn't. You held the picture in your mind like fire, feeding it with patience, guarding it when no one else believed. That vision became oxygen. And now here it is, no longer a dream, no longer a sketch inside your skull. It's standing in daylight, undeniable, breathing, alive. And the same eyes that once rolled with mockery are wide with disbelief, forced to admit that what they swore was delusion was only delayed arrival. That's why the room feels different now. Every corner buzzes with the truth. You dreamt it, you carried it, and you pulled it into existence. And now they can't look away. For them, it was always just talk, just fantasy, just a story you whispered to yourself. They never believed it could grow legs, never imagined it could break through walls and step into reality. But now, here it is, standing taller than their doubts, brighter than their disbelief, undeniable in its presence. And the shock is written all over their faces. The dream they mocked has become the stage they must now live on. They are spectators, powerless, reduced to witnesses of the transformation they swore would never come. And the hardest part for them isn't watching it exist. It's realizing they have no control, no influence, no power to stop it. Your dream turned into reality, and reality turned into their punishment. What rattles them most isn't the dream itself. It's that they're forced to watch it breathe in front of them. They tried to dismiss it, tried to laugh it away, but here it stands. Undeniable, no longer a sketch in your imagination, but a monument they can't tear down. Their silence is the loudest proof of all, because every second they watch is another second of surrender. And it stings them, doesn't it? To see what they swore would never happen unfold step by step, detail by detail, exactly as you envisioned. They can't rewrite the script now. They can't erase the evidence. The dream they mocked has bound them as witnesses. And the irony is perfect. They became the audience of the very story they refused to believe. Every step you take now feels like déjà vu, doesn't it? Because you already walked these halls in your mind, already lived this scene 1,000 times when no one else believed. They mocked it as fantasy, dismissed it as delusion, but you knew it was rehearsal. The dream was the draft, the blueprint, the prophecy. And tonight, the prophecy is fulfilled. What once lived in silence has unfolded into undeniable reality, and the very people who doubted you are trapped in the role of witnesses. They can't rewrite the ending now. They can't escape the stage. They sit in their own disbelief, forced to accept that your vision outran their laughter. You dreamt it, you owned it, and now they're living in the proof of what they swore could never exist. Look at their faces now, frozen between disbelief and shame. Because the cruelest twist of fate is this: they aren't just watching your dream become real. They're watching themselves become the villains of their own memory. Every smirk, every dismissal, every word they once used to tear you down now plays back in their minds like echoes in a cave they can't leave. They're trapped in the reflection of their own arrogance, forced to measure the difference between their noise and your vision. And that mirror doesn't forgive. It doesn't let them hide. It shows them exactly what they were: doubters, mockers, cowards who couldn't see past their own limits. Now the mirror shines brighter than their excuses, and reality forces them to bow, because the dream they called impossible has already crowned itself as truth, and they can't unsee it. They forget the hours, don't they? The nights when no one clapped, no one cared, no one believed. While they mocked, you were building. While they laughed, you were shaping. Every quiet hour became a brick. Every sacrifice became a beam. Every doubt they hurled became fuel for the fire. And now, the stage they're staring at wasn't handed to you. It was carved from the silence they thought would bury you. That's what makes it sting them most. They can't claim they helped, can't pretend they saw it coming, because this reality was born in defiance of their disbelief. And now here they sit, spectators in the arena they said you'd never enter. Their punishment isn't just watching, it's knowing they fueled the very dream they tried to crush, and that dream now towers over them in daylight. Look closely, their eyes give them away, wide, restless, darting like cornered prey. They don't know whether to stay silent or to applaud, whether to hide or to bow, because nothing in their script prepared them for this. They wrote you off as fantasy, as delusion, as harmless noise. Yet here you stand, wrapped in reality that glows brighter than their doubt ever did. And the truth crashes in like thunder. They aren't in control anymore. The stage belongs to you. The spotlight bends toward you, and their role has been reduced to spectators of your rise. That's the shock they can't mask, the undeniable awareness that the dream they mocked now owns the room, and no denial can rewrite what their eyes already confessed. They wanted a nightmare. Instead, they got proof. And proof doesn't fade. They thought dreams were fragile, temporary sparks that fade with time. But yours wasn't fragile. It was forged. Every sneer they threw at you became steel. Every laugh became a nail driven into the frame of something greater. And now that dream didn't just survive, it outlived their doubt. Look at them now, sitting in silence, trapped in the theater of your reality, forced to watch the blueprint they once mocked become a monument. They wanted you to wake up and face reality. Instead, reality woke up and bent itself to your vision. That's the humiliation they carry. They didn't just misjudge you, they misjudged the laws of possibility. Because you proved that vision, carried with persistence, doesn't fade, it multiplies until it becomes too large for the world to ignore. Their greatest punishment isn't that your dream became real, it's that they have no choice but to watch it unfold. Every detail hits them, every milestone is a reminder of their blindness. Every step forward is a jolt against their doubt. They can't look away, because ignoring you would only magnify your presence. They can't deny it, because the evidence stands in front of them, undeniable, breathing. So they sit in silence, trapped in the theater of your rise, bound by the very reality they swore could never exist. And that's the sweetest irony. You never begged them to believe. You never needed their validation. All you did was keep moving, keep building, keep holding the vision. Now their role has been reduced to that of spectators, prisoners anchored to the sight of the impossible becoming undeniable truth. Listen closely and you'll hear it, the cracking of their excuses breaking under the weight of proof. For years they hid behind reasons. It's unrealistic. It can't be done. Nobody's ever pulled it off. Those words once sounded solid, but now they crumble like brittle glass. Because every breath of your reality destroys another shield they built to protect their pride. They can't lean on logic anymore. They can't disguise their disbelief as wisdom. All they're left with is silence, forced to accept that their impossible was only code for their own limits. And nothing eats at a doubter more than watching someone else live the life they swore couldn't exist. That collapse is permanent. Their excuses crumbled the second your dream opened its eyes, and all that's left is the truth they can't swallow. You were right, and they were never enough to stop you. Feel it. The very air carries a different weight now. The same spaces where they once mocked you have turned into monuments of irony. Every corner buzzes with the story. Every wall hums with the truth. What was once dismissed as fantasy now stands as reality. They can't laugh here anymore. The air itself won't let them. Their jokes dissolve before reaching their lips. Their bravado evaporates before it takes shape, because the atmosphere remembers, and it bends to the proof you created. That's what shakes them most. Not just that you built the dream, but that the dream changed the environment itself. The energy obeys you now. Their world rearranged itself around your vision. and they are left stranded in a silence that reminds them of their failure every second. The atmosphere is no longer neutral. It belongs to you. Look around the room. Their expressions tell the whole story. Some stare in awe. Some look away in shame. Others wear masks that crack the moment your eyes meet theirs. But every face, no matter how hard it tries, carries the same confession: disbelief turned into submission. They once rolled those same eyes at your vision, shrugged off your words, dismissed your persistence. Now those eyes can't hold steady because they've seen what persistence becomes when it refuses to fade. Their faces are mirrors reflecting regret, each one betraying the truth they'd rather bury. That the dream they mocked now owns the stage, and they are powerless in its presence. You don't need to speak. Their faces already tell the story. The silence between you is heavier than any speech, because it proves your rise has carved itself into their pride. What once lived only in your imagination now stands as the throne beneath your feet. You didn't just manifest a vision, you carved a kingdom out of disbelief. Every brick of this reality was forged from their laughter, every wall raised higher by their doubt, every foundation strengthened by the stones they threw. And now here you stand, not as a dreamer, but as ruler of the stage they swore you'd never reach. That throne stings their pride, because it reminds them that they were architects of their own humiliation. They tried to bury your vision, but instead they buried themselves under the weight of proof. Your dream became their sentence. Your reality became their crown, and now they bow without meaning to, their silence louder than applause. The throne was always waiting. You simply proved you were the only one who could sit on it. They thought they'd be the ones to laugh last, the ones telling the story of how you failed, how your vision collapsed under the weight of reality. But fate reversed the script. Instead, they've been reduced to witnesses, silent, stunned, locked to their seats while the dream they mocked unfolds in front of them. That's the cruelty of truth. It doesn't need their permission to exist. It forces itself into their eyes, makes them swallow the taste of their own disbelief. And now they can't rewrite the memory, can't soften the edges, can't pretend they were supportive. Everyone remembers what they said. Everyone remembers the way they doubted. And now, everyone can see them sit powerless in the shadow of what they tried to stop. Their defeat isn't private, it's public. And it's permanent, because they aren't just watching your dream, they're watching the end of their pride. What unsettles them most isn't that your dream became real, it's that it feels permanent now, written into the laws of their world. At first, they told themselves it was luck, a glitch, a moment that would fade. But as the days stretched on, reality refused to retreat. Your vision didn't dissolve, it solidified. The fantasy they mocked transformed into a law they can't break. And every time they see it, they're reminded of their own blindness, their own limits, their own barriers. You broke no rules, you rewrote them. You bent the system until it bent to you. And now the dream is no longer a dream, it's a rule they live under. That's why their silence stings. It isn't just disbelief, it's submission. They're forced to obey the reality you created, because no amount of denial can erase a law written in proof. Proof is the heaviest force, and you wielded it without lifting a hand. Words can be twisted, rumors can be denied, but proof breaks defenses without a touch. That's why their shoulders slump now, why their eyes can't rise to meet yours. The dream they mocked has transformed into undeniable evidence, and evidence has no weakness. They can't argue with it, can't laugh it away, can't bury it under noise. Every second they sit in its shadow, their pride erodes. And the cruel irony? They built this proof for you. Their mockery gave you fire, their doubt gave you direction, their laughter gave you focus. They handed you the weight that now weighs on them. That's the brilliance of it. You didn't just prove yourself right. You made their disbelief the very fuel that proved them wrong. Listen to the room now. It isn't filled with applause. It isn't roaring with noise. It's silent. Not peaceful silence, but silence soaked in shame. Every doubter feels it pressing on them, reminding them of every careless word they once threw your way. That silence exposes them more than any argument could. It forces them to sit with themselves, to face the reality that they weren't just wrong, they were blind. They stare at your reality, and every second of quiet hits deeper than 1,000 insults. Because silence is a mirror, and in it they see their arrogance, their weakness, their failure to see what was always destined. And here's the part that marks them for good. They'll never escape that silence. Every time your name is spoken, it will pull them back to this moment, back to the night where silence was louder than every doubt combined. They'll try. Of course. They'll twist the story, claim they always knew, pretend they saw it coming. But lies don't stand long against evidence this sharp. Everyone remembers the nights they laughed, the moments they sneered, the times they called it impossible. Their words are on record, in memory, in whispers, in imprints, and no amount of revision can erase the truth that now stands in front of them. The dream they mocked is alive, undeniable, breathing proof that exposes every false claim they'll try to make. That's what hits hardest. They can't rewrite history because your reality already wrote it for them. It's engraved into the timeline, etched into their reputations, stamped into their pride. Every attempt to bend the story will only point back to the same fact that they doubted and you delivered. That truth will follow them long after the dream turned into law. Now they sit, powerless, their only role reduced to observation. They didn't want to be an audience, but destiny forced them into the seats. They didn't want to see your dream take shape, but reality pressed it against their faces. And the cruelest twist? They can't look away. Every step you take upward drags their eyes higher. Every milestone you claim weighs heavier on their pride. They are trapped in the theater of your rise, forced to applaud silently with their own shame. And that's the essence of power. When even your doubters become spectators to the story they tried to bury. They thought they could write you out of existence, but instead they became extras in the movie of your ascension. Their punishment isn't just watching, it's realizing they're characters in a legend they can never control. What once seemed harmless to them, a dream too fragile to fear, has now become the force they can't outrun. Not because it destroys them with claws or fire, but because it exposes them with truth. Every time they see your success, they are reminded of their failure to believe. Every glimpse of your reality is a mirror reflecting their own limits, their own lack of vision. That's why they squirm when your name is mentioned. Why their laughter sounds forced, why their silence grows heavier. To them, your dream was supposed to vanish like smoke. Instead, it thickened into steel and wrapped itself around their pride. They don't sleep as easily now, because even in dreams they see the proof of yours, and that's their nightmare. That your vision became reality and their disbelief became limits they can't outrun. Here's what weighs on them most. They thought dreams belonged to sleep, fragile illusions that fade with daylight. But you showed them otherwise. You proved that a vision once carried with persistence doesn't dissolve, it hardens. And now your dream stands as law, written into reality where no hand can erase it. They look at you and realize they're living in rules they never agreed to, rules authored by the very voice they mocked. That's the burden. They thought they could dismiss you, but instead they became subjects under the empire of your becoming. Every glance in your direction is an admission that your vision outlived their limits. And this law, unlike their words, is permanent. They can't debate it. They can't overturn it. They can only exist inside it, forever reminded that what they once called unreal became the reality they now kneel to. What they once labeled as fantasy now stands as the very definition of reality. And here's the sharpest truth. It's not just real, it's bigger, brighter, sharper than they ever imagined. You didn't just achieve the dream, you expanded it until it swallowed their disbelief whole. Every detail they mocked is now part of the world they're forced to live in, a reality bent to your vision. And that's the ache that never fades. The dream wasn't small, and neither was the rise. It was always this vast, this inevitable, this unstoppable. They didn't see it, because they couldn't see past their own limits. But now, your vision has become their environment, your reality their cage. They don't get to escape it. They don't get to deny it. They can only breathe inside the truth you created, forever defined by the law of your becoming. At first, it was only in your mind. Intangible, fragile, something they could laugh at without consequence. But now it's everywhere, woven into the air they breathe, stitched into the walls they stand against, pulsing through the silence they can't control. Your dream didn't just become real, it became atmosphere. They live inside it now, unable to separate themselves from the very reality they doubted. That's what unsettles them. No corner feels safe from your vision, no space untouched by your proof. It follows them in whispers, in glances, in the heavy pauses before your name is spoken. What was once a fantasy has grown into their weather, their climate, their storm. And storms don't ask for belief, they demand adjustment. That's the truth they face every day. Your dream is no longer a dream. It's the air they breathe, and the empire you now rule. And now the final twist unfolds. What once felt unreal is no longer questioned. It's inevitable. They thought your vision was fragile, a passing dream that would dissolve under the weight of reality. But instead, reality bent to your vision. Now every doubter sits in silence, forced to witness the impossible become law. Their reckoning is lasting. They will always remember the smirks, the laughter, the disbelief, and how quickly it all fell away, the moment your dream opened its eyes. And your reward? You no longer carry the title of dreamer. You carry the crown of creator, the one who turned thought into proof, vision into empire, silence into command. The unreal didn't just become real, it became permanent, undeniable and unshakable. And from this day forward, they will never see you the same again.